My mother once said to me, "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, sweetheart. And you know what? That's okay. Someone has to support the stars." She said it softly over coffee, almost as if she was doing me a favor. I was 19, freshly commissioned, my uniform still crisp, and I wore it with pride. She didn't mean to hurt me, at least. I don't think she did, but that sentence cut through me like a knife. And from that moment on, it became the silent soundtrack to my life. Every holiday, every family gathering, I heard it echo. It rang in my ears as they doted on my sister, the real success story. They never said it directly, but I always felt it. Their silence was louder than words. When my sister got promoted, they posted about it online as if the world had just witnessed the second coming of Christ. But when I returned from deployment, no one was there to meet me at the airport. "You're always so busy," my dad said, like I had just missed an appointment. Not spent 7 months running black ops across borders no one dared name. At Thanksgiving, my seat was taken by a neighbor's son because he had just been accepted to law school. And that's a big deal. Right. I ate standing up by the sink. My medals, the ones that had never been celebrated, were still packed away in a box in the garage. That night, I told myself I was done. I wouldn't chase their approval anymore. I had survived enemy fire, and I didn't need to survive my family's indifference. Then, last month, I was sitting in the back of a command briefing. My role, just to observe. The room hummed with titles and ranks, names that always felt awkward when they were attached to me. And then the door opened. A commander walked in, scanned the room, and stopped. His gaze landed on me. He squared his shoulders, stood a little straighter, and said, "Ma'am, you're the general." And just like that, the room went silent. Not for her, not for my sister, but for me. That moment wasn't sweet. It was sharp. Years of being invisible shattered in a single breath. For the first time in my life, I wasn't ashamed to take up space. My name is Colleen Walsh. I've led men into battle, held the hands of soldiers dying in the sand, and made decisions that still keep me awake at night. But the hardest thing I've ever done, surviving being invisible in my own home. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Please, drop a listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It means more than you think. Sometimes, just knowing someone's out there makes it easier to speak the truth. And if my story resonates with you, if it makes you feel less alone, please consider subscribing. It helps this truth spread further. Thank you. Now, let me tell you everything. I'm Colleen Walsh, the oldest daughter of the Walsh family 3 generations deep in uniform, discipline, and expectations that were never spoken aloud. We were practically raised on base protocol at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The military wasn't just a career. It was our family religion. My father, Roy Walsh, retired as a colonel from the Air Force. My mother, Marilyn, served as a combat medic, and she wore her silence like another set of medals. My younger brother is now a major, and my baby sister, Erica, is about to be pinned as a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And me, I'm the one they don't talk about. I'm the quitter, the one who walked away from West Point after my first year. They said I couldn't handle the discipline, the structure. They said I didn't have what it took, but none of them knew. I didn't leave. I was handpicked for a covert intelligence program so classified that it didn't officially exist. No graduation ceremony, no frame photos on the wall, just a series of one-way tickets to places no tourist should ever go. For the last 20 years, I haven't been absent from their lives. I've just been erased. I sent birthday flowers to Mom, a Christmas card to Dad with a fake address stamped in Maryland. I watched from a distance as Erica climbed the ranks, as my brother got married on a base chapel lawn, as their lives unfolded in neat, public chapters. I wasn't in the picture. Literally, a cousin once told me there was a family photo where I had been cropped out to balance the frame. They said I quit because I wasn't tough enough. What they didn't know, what I couldn't tell them, was that I spent 6 months buried in operations in Damascus. I spent 4 days hiding inside the walls of a hostage compound in Libya, coordinating a rescue that saved 30 civilians. In a mission called Candle Strike, I lost 3 of my men and a piece of myself that I still haven't found again. And still, I came back. Just never home. You don't tell those stories in my family unless they come with medals and press coverage. I had neither. Just scars, most of them invisible. Then came the call. It was early fall crisp air. gold leaves clinging to the tail end of summer. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice was brisk, not unkind but cold like a nurse reading a chart. Not speaking to her daughter. Erica's getting promoted. You should come. Just don't wear anything weird. Don't make her look bad. No, how are you? No, we'd love to see you. Just instructions. As usual. I didn't argue. I said, I'll be there. Not because I expected a red carpet or that they'd welcome me with open arms, but because I was going back for one reason. To see if, for once, they could look at me and see the woman behind the shadow. To see if, in the right light, they'd realize they'd misjudged me all these years. That night, I stood in front of my closet. In the back, there was my old dress uniform crisp, untouched, folded as if still waiting for a ceremony that never happened. I put it into my suitcase. Next to it, I hung a soft, neutral blouse and slacks, clothes that wouldn't draw attention, clothes that wouldn't scream for validation, just quiet fabric in quiet tones. In the mirror, my face stared back at me, sharp eyes, lines around my mouth from too many sunrises and deserts. A face no longer young, but not old either, just settled, no rank, no applause, no resentment either. Almost time. I whispered to the glass. I didn't know if I meant time to forgive or time to let the silence finally speak for itself. I arrived at Fort Campbell right on time. No warm welcome. No one waiting out front. Not even a nod from the MP at the gate. The VIP parking lot was already full, lined with Lexus SUVs and government-issued sedans. I parked by the logistics unit's fence, where the gravel crunched under my boots like it remembered who I was, even if no one else did. The house hadn't changed much, same beige paint. Same weathered porch swing, same flag swaying with ceremonial pride. I opened the door and stepped inside. Into the same old air that smelled like lemon cleaner and old paperbacks. My mother stood in the dining room, placing printed name cards along the table without looking up. Go change your shirt, she said. You and Erica will sit next to each other. But please don't interrupt her speech tomorrow. No. Hello. No hug. No comment on the fact I'd driven 10 hours to be here. Just instructions. Like always, my father greeted me the way officers greet each other when one's about to retire early. A firm pat on the back. A nod of recognition. Something that looked like respect but was stripped of familiarity. Good. You made it, he said, his eyes already sliding past me to the room behind. Erica made her entrance like a debutante in dress blues. Her uniform was impeccable, bars polished to perfection. Ribbons laid out like she'd won a war by herself. She swept across the room, kissing hands, charming friends. When she finally noticed me, she gestured toward me with a manicured hand. This is my sister. She used to be in the military for a bit. Now she's working in admin, I think. There was laughter. Light. Polite. The kind that cuts deeper because no one thinks it's cruel. A cousin leaned in and asked, in a half whisper, So, what do you do now? VA office. Better than nothing. Right. Better than nothing. I smiled not wide enough to show teeth, just enough to let it die there. I said nothing. There's a kind of dignity in silence, especially when your truth is classified. Inside the house, every wall was a shrine. Framed photographs of my siblings in uniform. Graduation portraits. Retirement ceremonies. Award dinners. I scanned every frame. None of them held my face. The last one with me in it was from 2004, just after I left West Point. I remembered because I was cropped out later. They said it was to fit the new frame. A little niece, maybe 6 or 7, tugged on my hand. Did you ever shoot a real gun? She asked, her eyes round with excitement. I crouched to her level and smiled. Sweetheart, I once wrote a plan that helped 30 soldiers make it home alive. That's better than any shot I've ever taken. She blinked, then ran off to play with a plastic tank. Dinner was a small pre-ceremony event, just family and a few close officers. Erica played the perfect host, all grace and calculation. At one point, someone complimented her on her poise. I've been practicing my speech, she said, sipping wine. Then, casually, I want people to know that you don't have to walk away from something to realize you were wrong. The air in the room shifted just slightly. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The message was clear, and it had my name all over it. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The house buzzed with conversation and laughter behind me. But I wanted none of it. In the distance, a brass band was rehearsing. The notes carried through the night like ghosts. I sat on the edge of the steps, watching the wind move through the trees. Tomorrow, I would sit quietly, let her have her moment. But truth has a voice of its own, and when it chooses to speak, no one, not even Erica, will be able to talk over it. The hall at Fort Campbell was a cathedral of command-high ceilings, brass light fixtures casting golden halos over rigid rows of folding chairs, all arranged by rank and title, like a battlefield without bullets. I was seated in the third row from the back, wedged between a junior officer's fiancé and someone's overly perfumed aunt. Our row was labeled family, unassigned a bureaucratic way of saying, "You're here," but not really. Erica stood tall behind the podium at the front. The flag stood to her left, polished boots to her right. She had that look in her eyes controlled fire, the kind you learn to perfect during war games and promotion boards. She spoke of loyalty, perseverance, and my favorite, the importance of distancing oneself from those who once abandoned the sacred trust of the uniform. Every word calculated, every glance choreographed. The speech wasn't just for her superiors. It was aimed at ghosts, and one ghost in particular. When my name was mentioned only in passing as a family member in attendance, I noticed a few heads turning. A couple of officers exchanged hushed comments. One leaned toward another and whispered, "She looks familiar. Where have I seen her before?" I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes ahead, posture neutral, face unreadable. That's when he entered General Hammond. He walked in with quiet weight, the kind that makes a room straighten its spine before it even realizes it. He scanned the audience briefly, then his eyes locked on mine, a flash of recognition, then a brisk, direct march toward my seat. My heart didn't race, my palms didn't sweat, but the air around me shifted, like the wind before a siren. The general came to a sharp stop beside me, heels clicking. He raised his hand in a textbook salute sharp, proud, and public. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady and clear. "General Walsh, it's an honor to see you again." The room didn't just quiet, it froze. Erica's voice cracked mid-sentence. Her hand holding the note card trembled. The applause that had rippled after her earlier lines vanished. She was no longer the gravitational pull in the room. I rose to return the salute not because I needed validation, but because I refused to let a man who once trusted me with lives stand alone in respect. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother drop her water glass. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. My father stood halfway up in reflex, then slowly sank back into his seat, as if trying to disappear into the upholstery. A young officer behind me leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, not as quietly as he thought, "Is that her? The ghost commander from Dagger." Erica struggled to gather herself. She tried to continue, voice brittle, eyes scanning the room for anchor points. But the energy had shifted. Eyes no longer hung on her every word. They were pinned to me, or worse, to the gap between what they thought they knew and what they now realized they didn't. The ceremony ended with polite applause, but the tension lingered in the air like smoke after a controlled burn. As the guests filed out and the officers mingled, Erica cornered me near the exit. "No congratulations. No smile. Why didn't you say something?" she hissed under her breath. "You let me stand up there like a fool. Was that your plan?" I looked at her not unkindly, but without yielding. "If you need the truth to shrink, you never stood tall to begin with." Her mouth tightened. She blinked twice, fast like she was trying to hold something back. I walked past her before she could reply. The heels of my boots echoed against the polished floor. This time, as I walked away, I didn't feel the usual sting of invisible eyes mocking my back. Instead, I felt the weight of confusion behind me, an entire room unsure of the roles they'd been assigned to play, now realizing the cast list might have been wrong all along. After the ceremony, I didn't return to my family's house. I drove back to the base and let myself into the quiet, nondescript guest quarters. They had assigned me standard military beige walls, stiff bedding, and a lamp that hummed faintly when turned on. It was the kind of room built to host people briefly and forget them quickly. I dropped my keys onto the dresser, kicked off my shoes, and spotted something that didn't belong, a plain manila envelope, resting squarely at the center of the desk. No names, no seal, no handwriting. Just sitting there like it had always been waiting for me. I opened it. Inside was a printed scan of an email, time-stamped 2 years ago. No sender listed, just a message, forwarded from an encrypted relay server. The subject line, "Reckless operation. civilian casualties. The body of the email contained allegations against Colleen W., accusing her of commanding an unsanctioned mission that resulted in multiple civilian deaths. The message claimed the details were buried in redacted reports and urged a fringe military blog to expose the rot within. It was a strange sensation reading your own death sentence, drafted by someone else. The wording stopped me cold because I recognized it, not just the operation it referenced, but the specific phrasing nearly word for word from an after-action classified report I had once reviewed in a steel-lined bunker in Stuttgart. That report had only been seen by 3 people: myself, the lead analyst, and one junior officer with peripheral clearance, Erica. The dates lined up with a period when I had suddenly and inexplicably been flagged for a brief internal investigation. At the time, I was told it was an automated red flag system reviewing anomaly data. Routine, nothing to worry about. The case had been dismissed within days. I had believed them. But someone had made sure the smoke lingered long after the fire had been put out. I took the envelope with me. I didn't bother changing. I found Erica at the after party, still dressed in her uniform, surrounded by admirers, basking in the warm buzz of achievement. I waited until the crowd thinned, then caught her just as she stepped outside to take a call. I held up the scan. She glanced at it, her eyes catching on the page as if seeing it again for the first time. "Did you send this?" I asked, my voice even not accusing, just asking for the truth. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, without blinking, she said, "Yes." I nodded slowly. Why? Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders dropped like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. "Because you weren't supposed to win," she said. "You left. You didn't stay and build something. You don't get to come back and still be more important." I didn't move. I didn't speak. She pressed on, her voice cracking. "They never stopped talking about you, even when you were gone, even when I did everything right. I thought if I could just erase you from the picture, I could finally be seen." Silence fell between us, heavier than any accusation. I could see the child in her, the little sister who once trailed behind me, begging to be included, needing to feel special in a house where excellence was currency. "You do realize," I said, finally, quietly, "that leaking classified information is a criminal offense." Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before narrowing again. She said nothing. I didn't push further. I turned and walked away. The cool night air hit me like a wave. I clutched the envelope in my hand, fingers trembling not from rage, but from the deep, quiet ache of understanding. Sometimes the blade in your back comes from the same hand that once helped you learn to walk. It was the sound of the base alarm that jolted me awake, not the usual morning bugle, but something sharper, urgent, piercing, a siren belt, not to wake you gently, but to force adrenaline into your blood. My phone lit up a moment later, emergency protocol active. All high-clearance personnel were being summoned to the coordination center. I didn't have time to question why. Muscle memory took over. I was dressed and out the door in minutes. The halls of Fort Campbell were flooded with movement, officers in various states of alert, some still pulling on boots, others already seated in front of flickering monitors. At the entrance of the main ops room, a grim-looking sergeant handed me a file thin, but heavy in implication. A breach, a classified dossier connected to Operation Dagger, the mission I had led in the shadow corridors of Syria, had just been published to an encrypted forum on the dark web. The leak was recent, time-stamped within the last 3 hours. Worse, the forensic trace led back to an internal IP specifically, an inactive device once assigned to me, still embedded in the base system. It was like waking up in a life you didn't remember signing up for. Within half an hour, I was seated across from General Hammond and 2 officials from Military Intelligence Command. The room felt colder than it was. They didn't say I was under arrest, but I was under suspicion. They asked for full access to my communications from the past 6 months. I didn't argue. I gave them everything. Still, something didn't sit right. My mind circled back to the email the one Erica had sent, the scan that had landed mysteriously on my desk. I hadn't dug deeper at the time, but now, with the full tools of the agency at my disposal, I retrieved the metadata and decrypted the sending path. What I found was startling. The anonymous sender had used an outdated link to an auto-backup server that once archived mission logs. That server had long been decommissioned or so I thought. The link they used, triggered a dormant process, one that unintentionally retrieved and attached a hidden file with top clearance intel, the file that had now surfaced online. It was a careless mistake, but not a random one. When I traced the origin device of the email, it pointed to a machine that had been logged into 2 days earlier using an active credential, Erica's. She had checked in late at the base for training prep. According to records, I remembered then she'd mentioned leaving her laptop at the comm station overnight, unlocked, unattended. Her tone had been off, like she'd expected me to say something about it. Now, her access was part of a forensic trail. I stared at the glowing screen. My sister, the little girl who once cried when I left for West Point. The woman who, now out of desperation, was unraveling herself thread by thread. Before I could process more, a knock at my temporary quarters broke the storm inside my head. It was my father. He looked older than I remembered, less stern, more human. We hadn't spoken alone in years. He didn't say hello. He just stood at the threshold and asked quietly, "Is it true? Did you leak it?" I met his eyes. There was no anger there, just fear. Fear for me. Fear for the family name. Maybe fear for everything he'd ever believed about honor and service. I didn't flinch. "I don't need you to believe me," I said, "but I will prove the truth not for me, for the people still trusting this system with their lives." He nodded once, said nothing else, and walked away. The next morning, I requested permission to lead the internal investigation. It was unorthodox, but technically I was still on classified reserve duty and had the clearance to operate. More importantly, I had the motive no one else did to expose the leak without burning down the institution that had shaped and nearly buried me. General Hammond listened without interrupting, then stood slowly, walked around the briefing table, and extended his hand. "General," he said, eyes steady, "the floor is yours." The room was so quiet, the hum of the fluorescent light sounding like static in my ears. I sat at the head of the Strategic Command briefing room, where I had once been denied entry by rank. Now, seated by necessity across from me were representatives from the Military Investigation Bureau and Base Security Commanding. Their faces were stony, their notebooks open but untouched. I laid out my hypothesis calmly. The breach wasn't intentional sabotage. It was a cascade, a sequence of reckless decisions and misjudged steps that began with an anonymous email one sent not with the intention to betray, but to provoke, and in doing so, it triggered a minefield. I presented metadata, system trails, and a digital breadcrumb that began with Erica's email and ended with a leaked classified file. They didn't dispute my logic, but they did one worse. General Hammond appointed an internal task force, not of experts or outsiders, but my own family. I was to lead the team as primary analyst and field coordinator. My father, Colonel Roy Walsh, would manage campaign intel archives from past operations. He still had restricted access from his advisory post-retirement role. Erica was to trace internal system vulnerabilities and access points, and my mother, with her old training as a combat medic and a side specialty in biological trace evidence, was assigned to assist with forensic recovery from the laptop left behind in the tech bay. It was like being thrown into a theater piece where every actor knew their role, but none wanted to share the stage.